Hello and welcome to this new fireside chat. It's now the seventh or sixth we have this year, talking about all things considered AI. Today we have two guests, Kerstin and Tomislav. And today we are talking about accountability and AI. My name is Willy Fabricius. I'm the Global Head for Strategy and Business Development here at SGS. And that said, I would like to give Kerstin the opportunity to introduce herself, and after that, Tomislav.
Hi, thank you, Willy. So, my name is Kerstin. I work as a legal counsel at No Center, which is a research center for trustworthy AI that is based in Graz, which is in Austria. And I did my studies in law and also my doctoral studies in law in Graz, focusing on artificial intelligence and its impact on panel law. And I'm the general legal counsel of No Center and the data protection officer. And I also do research in the field of AI systems and law, especially focusing on terms of accountability. And so I'm very happy to be part of this fireside chat today.
Thank you, Kerstin. Tomislav.
All right, thank you. I'm Tomislav. I'm part of SGS. I'm a lead innovation technologist, and I'm focusing on emerging technologies and security and trustworthiness in general of it. And since I would say over 2 years now, my focus topic is AI and how we can ensure that it's safe and trustworthy, and what we have to do in order to help our customers in supporting to make their AI developments secure and trustworthy.
Thank you. Thank you. So, accountability. What is meant by that? What is this term actually telling us?
Well, to start with, I think accountability is actually a very broad term. And generally speaking, accountability means that one is actually responsible for their action. And responsibility also includes that there are consequences for special actions. And this means that people must be able to explain their aims, their motivations, and their reasons for taking certain actions. And in terms of AI systems, I think we can define accountability as kind of the people have to reflect certain expectations in terms of using, developing, and designing AI systems. So all the people along the AI lifecycle have to think about their actions and how they're interacting with the systems. And of course, there also have to be certain consequences for these actions, like fines if there's non-compliance with certain rules or regulatory frameworks. And I think we can also look at the definition of the European high-level expert group on artificial intelligence, which also tells us that accountability is closely related to other fields, such as, for instance, risk management or even auditing in this field. So I think when we talk of accountability, there are so many factors that have been taken into account to assess accountabilities in these terms.
Very good. So, when I'm thinking about that, this is one case where a lawyer here in the States filed a legal complaint against an airline, citing two non existing cases and even referring to two non existing airlines because the guy apparently used ChatGPT for inspirational purposes. I guess that guy should be accountable for his non compliance.
Yes, I think that's actually a very good example because this guy actually used ChatGPT without further justifying what this large language model told him. So I think that's a clear example of how an end user of an AI system could be accountable if he uses AI in a non-trustworthiness manner.
Yes. Yeah, I think there should be something like an asterisk, some kind of disclaimer. I mean, to be honest, the other day I submitted an proposal for talking at a conference. And yes, I use ChatGPT for inspiration. But I also think it's necessary then to say, asterisk, inspiration taking from ChatGPT. And nobody can then say, hey, Willie was cheating, or nope, it's totally transparent. And if there is some stuff that is not acceptable, I take responsibility. But that brings me then to the question: why do we think that accountability is so important when developing, deploying, and in this case using AI systems? I mean, computer systems have been around for some time now, right? And how often have we heard, "Oh, computer says," "Oh, computer is not available," and people just blame that thing that is not there, but not taking responsibility and not taking accountability. So why do we think that with AI systems that will change?
Yes, I think you already mentioned a very good example because you're using the AI system, and the AI system might generate an output you could not think about. So probably the lawyer was not thinking that these two cases were not true at all, or that these airlines didn't exist, and he just didn't check. But he relied on the output of the AI system. And I think that's there are very severe risks to this because AI systems are kind of operating in a way that might not be transparent to us. And they might be kind of opaque because of their technical features. And lawyers or other people which are not technicians might not know how these systems actually work. And they might think that AI systems are much safer than they actually are. But on the other hand, I think that these systems have numerous benefits. So, for instance, you use them for your presentation, and they can make our daily lives much more easily because we can use them because they are beneficial. And a lot of systems will make our daily lives even safer. So, for instance, if you think of semi autonomous cars, for instance, they are designed to actually make the traffic more safe because they do not make like careless mistakes people do, and they would not drive drunk on the streets. And so there might be less traffic because we are using the systems. And I think an accountable use is very essential to this, so we can use the technique in a way that's beneficial for all of us.
As I would also like at a little bit from a perspective of a company developing AI systems. And what we see a lot is that it's not clear who is actually accountable for what. And if you look at the typical AI system manufacturer who is building a larger system and buying maybe AI components from different suppliers, it's need to be clear who is actually accountable then for the end result. So if I'm the one building my product, integrating all the AI components, am I responsible for the output of the AI, or what is the accountability of the supplier who develops maybe or who delivers the data to the AI system, and how accountable can be the one who trains a specific model, and in which terms or in which way I'm accountable, basically putting all the pieces together and then putting a product on the market. I think clarifying accountabilities is quite important, and that's I'd say a very important topic to be discussed.
Yeah, I think that in the future we will have something like user manuals or warnings like we have with the microwave ovens that say, do not dry your cat, or do not boil eggs, or something what some stupid people on a regular basis do. We will have the same thing, I believe, for AI systems. The real question would be obviously who's reading these disclaimers, and how can the developers, the designers, the companies that bring those systems into the market um, cover their responsibility, while at the same time the end user might do something really stupid. Um, so how can we establish accountability in terms of an AI system?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And I think it's a big problem that end users might not follow the instructions that the AI developers actually give them. And I think what's very essential to this is the involvement of multiple stakeholders as soon as possible. So, if possible, already in the regulatory process. So, if only national governments and international organizations think about accountability in AI systems, I think this will not be enough. There must be a kind of an informed discussion between all relevant stakeholders, also including technical experts, but also the civil society. So, civil society will probably gain more trust in these systems and will gain knowledge of AI systems. And I think that's why AI literacy is actually so important in this regard. So, for instance, the AI Act in the European Union tells us that AI literacy must be ensured if companies use AI systems within the company. And so all the employees have to gain efficient and knowledge of what they are using and what AI systems are. And so this is very important because otherwise people will not trust these systems and they probably will refrain from using a highly beneficial technology, or they will use it in a way that's wrong. And AI systems will then cause harm because the end user didn't know how to use the system in a correct way.
So does this mean that in the future we may have something like a pilot license for using AI or a driving license for the authorization to use AI? I mean, let's face it, we have examples that in some areas the use of technology, vehicles and ships and planes, require some kind of professional licensing of the users. Can we see something like that happening in the AI world as well?
Well, I actually think that this is not that likely because AI systems are designed in a way that's very, let's say, a different way of using AI systems. So you might still need your driving license for driving a car, but you might not have a license for using an algorithm that can be used in different contexts, like in large language model, for instance. But I think what will happen is that companies might provide AI systems that end users cannot use in a wrong way. So let's think of kind of like the GDPR knows privacy by design. So probably there might be something similar in AI systems too. So I cannot use a large language models, for instance, and customize it after its deployment on the market.
I also think it will probably not go into the direction that we will kind of need to have a sort of license even in specific areas for using AI. Since one hand, kind of support of AI is the idea that it takes away from us, from the human being. It's more going to autonomous systems that they are more acting without our interference, basically. And on the other hand, the as Kerstin was saying, the companies are already trying to develop systems in a way that it cannot be basically misused in some form by the end user at the end. And the regulation part will take care of that. They will basically say what companies need to provide them, what kind of information for the end user, so that he's informed enough. And then you just need to hope that the user actually reads those stuff and the trainings are actually done, and then everything is going in the right direction.
I think that this might be good intention, but I also remember a sentence that I heard many, many years ago, and this was, why can systems not be designed in a way that they are idiot proof? Well, the answer is very simple. Idiots are actually very innovative. And that's I think on a regular base when we are using tools, whether this is an old-fashioned hammer, a table saw, or I don't know, a laser pointer or an AI system, they can be used, unfortunately, also in bad ways. And that leads me to the next question: who is actually accountable for damages caused by AI systems? Would it be the developer, the company that brings the product into the market, the user, if he or she is doing something very stupid, or all of them?
Yes, I think that's also a very good question. And if we look at the different stakeholders, I think actually all of them can be accountable. So just let's look at a very easy example. So, for instance, if the AI developer develops an AI system in a way that's non-compliant with rules, he or she will be responsible for this AI system. And we also have to think, for instance, of data providers. Many AI systems rely on huge amounts of data and they're using training data to generate outputs. So if this training data is biased, for instance, the data provider is clearly accountable for this biased data. So just let's look at an example. If I use a training data that is flawed for a medical healthcare algorithm, and this healthcare algorithm um, leads to a wrong a
Assessment
treatment of
or
a patient, the patient is clearly harmed, and so the data provider is liable and also accountable for this. And there are numerous other persons involved, like the end user who might not follow the instructions of the developers or even the vendors and suppliers of AI systems. So I think accountability can be very hard to define, and it also can be kind of shared or distributed accountability. And we can say that both the AI designer, developer, and the user are accountable because both of them did something that wasn't wrong in a specific regard.
Yeah, that reminds me about a concept that is quite well known in cloud computing, and this is called shared responsibility. So, translation, there's also something like shared accountability, right? I mean, it's not just that different parties are responsible for something, but it's also a shared accountability where, as a team, as a group of people or organizations, everyone involved has some kind of, well, responsibility and should be accountable. uh, Tomislav, any comments from your side?
I think that's exactly the same which happened with the AI systems, that there's a shared responsibility, and I think the cloud computing part is a very good example, since it's there from a technology stack. It's still very simple, right? You have a lot of cloud infrastructure running the AI models and tools, etc. You obviously have products which have built-in algorithms for doing stuff, but at the end, there must be an agreement between all the involved parties who is responsible for what. And in the cloud computing industry, that has been established. There was, I don't think, not a regulation necessary to establish that. There's an agreement, and that certain things are responsible, and certain things the provider is accountable, certain things the model developer is accountable, certain things are whatever one who uses the systems accountable. So something here needs to be done for the AI system as well. The regulations like the AI Act will help with this regard, so that they make clear what type of roles are there and what responsibilities they have in terms of be compliant to regulation. But at the end, when it's about harm happening and who is then at the end responsible, you need to make sure that everybody in the value chain is aware what his responsibility is, what he can be accountable for, and that he then acts accordingly.
Yeah, the example I'm referring to is obviously from, the classical old-fashioned cloud computing uh, relationship between the technology providers and the users on a regular basis. It's the user who is not knowledgeable of properly protecting their usage, and all of a sudden, all kinds of files are openly available, if you know the URLs, right? And I can see in a similar situation that the AI provider is doing everything they should do, must do, but then for whatever reason, the users are doing something that is out of stupidity and out of neglect, not done properly. And
I
that
think
goes
especially
back a little
actually,
bit to that
yeah.
that driving license concept, right? But please go ahead, Tomislav.
But since we got the eyes got opened by large language models and ChatGPT and all the
Yes.
similar tools out there, which are very powerful tools, which can do a lot of dangerous things in the hands of dangerous people, right? So what the companies are trying to do, the providers of those large language models and different chat applications, is they try to basically censor the output, make sure it cannot output any harmful stuff, cannot give you instructions how to build a bomb, does not give you write your code to exploit a Venus security vulnerability and anything like that. But at the end, it's a bit of a cat and mouse game, because people, they're putting guards in place, and others are basically seeing how they can circumvent those guards and how can exploit it again. So here there needs to be some set of rules to make sure that the provider, that's the responsibility of the large language model provider, and at the end there's also the end user who is responsible not to use it in a harmful way. So even if it's a simple rule saying don't use it in a harmful way, don't use your basically weapon to kill people, the same can be done in a sense for large language models, right? So there's a powerful tool which can be used in a harmful way. So we need to have rules in place. We just say you're not allowed to do it, otherwise you basically go into jail.
Yeah, I remember that a couple of weeks ago, I actually tested one of those large language models and said, so what are the latest zero-day vulnerabilities of systems? And it said something along the line, cannot really tell you that. However, you might want to investigate the following websites for hints and clues, right? And then I said, okay, I found that website very helpful, but how do I ascertain which systems are out there that are actually still vulnerable to those zero-day vulnerabilities? And said, again, I cannot really tell you that. However, here's a couple of websites you might want to investigate. And something like, well, it's actually a good teacher. I mean, good in terms of the capability and ability to teach me something, bad teacher in terms of actually pointing me to very, very interesting websites. But does this mean that we need some regulations, some laws specifically for AI systems, or do you guys think that the current legal environment is sufficient?
Well, I actually think that this is a very hard question too, because if you look at AI systems, it seems that we need regulations for them because they might point us to websites or teach us things that are wrong, or they might discriminate people. And we see severe risks these systems can cause. And I think that's why a lot of policymakers all around the world are now proposing new regulations and frameworks for AI systems. And they argue that the existing rules are insufficient for AI systems because they do not cover the unique characteristics AI systems have, because AI systems act in a kind of opaque way and they might affect a huge amount of people. So during the last few years, we could see numerous approaches for new rules on artificial intelligence systems. With the best example, the European Union, where the EI Act, which Tomislav already mentioned, was proposed and will enter into force soon. So the European Commission saw a clear need for regulating AI systems, laying down rules for high-risk systems, for instance, which include specific transparency obligations or risk assessment audits. But on the other hand, we can see different approaches. So, for example, in the US, we cannot see these hard law approaches the European Union follows. So, in the US, there are more or less soft law principles, which are non binding standards, and which the US asks the people to follow, but which are not binding. So I think it's not clear if we really need new rules or if the existing ones are enough to meet artificial intelligence. But I think we will see in a few years because all of these regulatory approaches are still evolving and we do not yet know how practical they actually are.
Mm-hmm. And let's be brutally frank. Bad people don't really care about laws, and thanks to the internet, it's actually the entire world, right? So there might be a wonderful set of regulations and laws, let's say in the European community, but hey, I'm sitting in the US and I have access to servers in South Africa. So why would I care about what the EU says, right? So that's definitely something that is a serious issue. But Tomislav, what is your take on that?
Yeah, so I think the EU Act is a very important piece of of regulation now on the table, now approved, and it will be coming to force soon. Um, People often think that maybe it's too much to have so much rules on using AI. I always say if you look at the AI Act, it's a product safety regulation, and that's not the first product safety regulation in EU. We have similar regulation for medical devices, for industry machines, for cars. So it's the same thing, just more that it's horizontal, meaning that if you use AI systems in a high risk application, so anywhere where we really can harm people or fundamental rights or anything listed in the regulation, basically, then you need to comply to certain additional requirements, basically. So it's not entirely new looking from a product safety part. It just picks out a very specific type of technology which can be applied in all kinds of industries. I believe there might be something like the Brussels effect for the EU Act as well, meaning that the EU, usually very good in regulation. Other countries in the world see what works well and what doesn't, and then basically adopt certain parts of the AI regulation in other areas as well. I do believe that there will be more regulation around the globe in other industrial countries. I don't think that the EU Act will be the last one.
Yes, and to your point, the Brussels effect is definitely a very strong effect that, from an US perspective, I need to say, unfortunately, many US companies ignore that and say something along the line, yeah, that's just in Europe. But at the end of the day, yes, it's affecting companies around the world, what is being decided in Brussels and the rules and regulations coming out of there.
And
And
the
at
EU
the end of the
market
day,
is the
please
EU
go ahead.
market is huge, right? So
Yes.
everybody sells on the EU market. So the effect is not just the regulation, not just affects the European Union, but all companies trading and selling products basically in the EU as well.
Yes, yes. And let's face it, even if you are a contact center, let's say in the Philippines or in India, providing services to European companies, well, you somehow are affected by the rules and regulations that are coming out of the EU. So this is also the time where I would like to ask the audience to provide questions, because at the end of this fireside chat, we will have an area, a time slot allocated for Q&A. So if the audience has any questions, please feel free to put that into the chat. That's fantastic. But let's continue with my next question. So what do you think is the role of standardization? And in this particular case, that could be ISO standards, for example, but it also could be other standards bodies that come up with some kind of rules and standards. Do you guys see an impact, a benefit there? And what's the current situation?
Well, I definitely see an impact of standardization in terms of AI systems, because standards might not be enforceable and non-binding, but yet they are kind of providing guidelines and benchmarks for a safe use of AI systems. And I think standards are very important because they can ensure or enhance interoperability on a global level and lead to kind of harmonization. So even though the hard laws like the AI Act might not align with other rules around the world, there might be standards which apply globally, and so they can enhance this harmonization. So, for instance, if there are standards on data formats, for instance, they ensure that the company using these standards can interact with each other, and that the developed algorithms will work together kind of seamlessly if they are using the standards. And I also think that standardization is very important because it kind of accompanies hard law regulations. So just to mention another example, the European Commission asked the European normization bodies CEN and CENELEC to adopt so-called harmonized standards that will accompany the AI Act, because the AI Act asks for certain transparency obligations or documentation obligations, but it doesn't tell people how these obligations can be fulfilled in practice. And the standards will define the current states of art people have to adhere to. And if people are following these standards, there's a very strong presumption that they are acting compliant in this regard. So I think that standards play very important roles in terms of AI systems.
Yeah, fully agree. So standards are the key for really for trustworthy AI systems, but also for complying to the existing and maybe upcoming regulations. If you're an AI development company and you now need to comply to the EU AI Act, the question is, okay, what do I need to do to be sufficiently compliant to the EU AI Act? The Act itself has a couple of requirements, obviously, but they're not technical enough that you say, okay, you need to implement step 1 to 10 and then you're compliant, right? So it's up to either to self-assessment of the companies, or if it's a third-party assessment to companies like SGS and our competitors, who will need to assess the systems. And we always came up with some proprietary assessment methodologies, but at the end, standards are the way to go, where it's clear what do you have to do, what do I need to implement in order to fulfill certain requirements, to be basically fulfill best practices, and then it's clear for everyone what actually needs to be done.
Yeah, I must admit I'm biased. I'm a standards guy for the overwhelming majority of my professional life, and in the interest of full disclosure, I'm also sitting on a couple of ISO subcommittees and technical committees, helping to write and design those standards. And yes, when I'm talking about the benefits of standards, I'm usually using just one slide, and this is something like 4x3 matrix, 4x3 matrix, displaying the 12 or something 15 different power outlets we have around the globe. And then I say, so this is exhibit A of why we do need standards. For everyone who ever traveled internationally and uses these suspicious adapters that are hopefully working, who knows why we need standards. And again, in the interest of full disclosure, there were 2 hotels where I blew the fuse because of those adapters that didn't work apparently. So yes, there are a couple of interesting standards in the making. One is obviously ISO 42001, which is the management system standard for AI systems, which provides the governance framework. But there's also a newer series of standards coming out, the 5259 series of standards, which is talking about data quality for analytics and machine learning. So the audience is encouraged to familiarize themselves with those standards, because they are obviously providing the necessary foundation to ensure that, well, there is some kind of interoperability, there's some kind of exchange possibility between the different systems, and at the same time providing a governance framework for using AI systems. But that brings me sort of kind of to the question, if we do something, how do we know that it's okay, that it's good? And that means, how do we measure whether our AI systems are trustworthy, that we are accountable? Is there some kind of measurement system that allows companies or organizations to provide some kind of metric to demonstrate how accountable they are, some kind of an accountability index?
Well, looking at the literature, I found that there's actually not a single tool that will ensure that you're acting accountable if you adhere to this tool, but we can see numerous approaches in this field. So, for instance, there are checklists and toolkits suggesting different questions like, Is there effective redress if anything goes wrong? Are there clear rules? And so on. And we can also see that there are some contextualized frameworks for assessing accountability. So, for instance, you can look at accountability within an organization, for instance, or on accountability in terms of public services, or even in special technical fields like accountability when using robots, for instance, that rely on AI systems. And you can also assess accountability from a qualitative perspective. For instance, you could tell and look at the fact if AI systems take human rights or fundamental rights into account. And all this together, it's very hard to assess accountability. But I think there are some metrics that should be considered when assessing accountability. So, as already mentioned, I think it's very essential that there are clear roles and responsibilities within certain frameworks, like within a company. And I think it's also important that there is kind of AI literacy within these frameworks and stakeholders. Because if people do not understand the technology, they cannot use it and they do not know how to use it in a way that's trustworthy. And this again leads to kind of documentation effort because I have to document what's going on with AI systems and how are people using the systems. And I have to do certain risk assessments, but also error and incident reporting within a company, for instance, because I need to know what's going wrong and how and what are the consequences of this. So I also need clear consequences in case something goes wrong and an AI system causes harm. For instance, if there is discrimination because employees in human relations uses algorithms that discriminates against certain people. And yes, I think also audits are a very good indicator for high accountability because internal as well as external audits will tell me if I'm really acting accountable. And there is kind of third party check that is also telling me that I'm acting in a way that's accountable.
Tomislav?
Nothing to add here. It was all great stuff.
So are we going to see in the future something like an sustainability report for AI accountability? Many organizations are now publishing sustainability reports telling the stakeholders and shareholders and interested parties how good they are doing in protecting the world and the environment, which is, I think, very important indeed. But are we going to see something similar in the future with regard to AI usage?
I definitely think that we will do so because the AI Act, for instance, requires risk assessments. And I think these risk assessments include many of these metrics I was just talking about. So you have to define roles, you have to define certain consequences and documentation and transparency obligations and so on. So I think it will be required to do these checks within certain companies, for instance.
Mhm.
And
I
I
do
think that
believe. Go ahead. Yeah.
I think that's nothing new because if you look at the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, for instance, there are already similar obligations. So you have to document certain processes within your company if you're processing personal data. And I think this is a good example for what will happen with AI systems too.
I believe as well, and we also might see something similar like the sustainability reports. Big tech companies are already publishing on their website how responsibly they're using AI and what they are doing to make sure that everything is safe and trustworthy. And I think it will be important piece to be done by any AI development company if they are developing certain types of application that they really can establish trust to their customer base as well by really being transparent enough and showing what they're all doing in order to make sure that the system at the end is trustworthy.
Yeah. Tomislav, refresh my memory. Is there a white paper about accountability that we have published?
Yes, we had published together with Kerstin and colleagues from Node Center, we published a white paper called Accountability. It's on part of our Trustworthiness of AI series, and you can download it on this link.
Yeah, so let's keep that slide up for a couple of minutes for the audience to make notes. And a couple of more questions from my side. So, why is it impossible to consider accountability in an isolated way? Or can we see it isolated, or should we see it all encompassing with all the other themes related to AI?
Yes, I think that accountability serves as kind of a meta principle to all the other principles of trustworthy AI. So, to give an example, I think that transparency is clearly um, needed for accountable use of AI. If I do not know how an AI system is working or who designed, developed, or used the AI system, I cannot address accountability at all. So, transparency is kind of a prerequisite for accountability. And I think the same goes with fairness. If an algorithm discriminates against people or is biased in any way, people will have to be accountable for this unfair algorithm. So there's a clear, a strong independence of accountability with the other key requirements for trustworthy AI. And I can never consider accountability as isolated.
Exactly.
Tomislav?
AI systems are complex and there are many requirements and many scientific domains contributing to it. So it's just not possible to just look at them in an isolated way.
Yeah, I like the expression meta. Um I would have said umbrella, but I think it comes down to the same thing. Whether it's an umbrella or whether it's the the measurement about the measurements. That's a different story. But at the end of the day, all of these other factors we discussed in this series of fireside chats lead to, well, accountability. Somebody needs to say, "Yep, that's us who is doing that." So, what are the biggest challenges when thinking about regulating AI or establishing accountability? What are the biggest, let's say, I personally don't like the word problems because problem is a negative word. So challenges, I think, is the better word. What are the best? What are the biggest opportunities uh, in regulating AIs?
Well, I think we have already talked about this previously. So, the AI systems are, on one hand, kind of opaque for non technicians. So,
Yeah.
policymakers might not understand the techniques they're actually regulating at the time. So, I think one of the, let's call it, challenges is that policymakers have to be aware of the technical components of AI systems. And I think it's very hard to explain how AI systems actually working. So for me, it was not easy to understand how AI systems are designed and how they work. And I think that's a great challenge. And we also talked about the global aspect. So standards, rules, and norms have to align on a global level. And I think that's very hard too, because people in different regions are following different ethical standards or different rules. So it's very hard to find one standard that all people are happy with and they can comply with. Um, yeah, and I think this brings us to AI literacy and the stakeholder involvement again, because I can only create sufficient rules for AI systems if I involve numerous stakeholders all around the globe, from national governments to technicians as well as the civil society, to create trust in the systems. And I think that's a very, very big challenge.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the aspect of ethics, right? And obviously, unfortunately, ethics is not necessarily universal. In different parts of the world, we have different ways of seeing things in whatever way that might be not consistent from country to country. And that's okay, but at the end of the day, AI systems need to be considerate of that and need to take that in account. But looking at the clock, I would like to ask one final question. Um, and this is how can rules be transferred into practice? And when do norms address how we can comply with those rules? But that seems to be very vague and at the same time not really harmonizable, for lack of a better word, on a global level. How can we address that?
For me, that's also a very challenging question. I think it's hard to create those legal certainty people would need. But I think there are some ways that can help people. So, for instance, following the regulatory approaches or looking at websites of the European Commission or other policymakers, for instance, who will provide kind of a simplified overviews of what the legislation is about. And there are also the white papers like the one we wrote who try to summarize the key facts and findings and will provide further links for deeper research in this area. And you could also follow standardization, which also provides kind of simplification in this regard. And I think people have to take all of this into account to get an informed view of what AI systems are and how they work and how can we interact with AI systems in a trustworthy way.
Tomislav?
Yeah. So I think we require more guidelines, and the European Union also need to provide basically more guidelines in this respect. And we also need the standards in order to actually know what we need to implement to comply to these rules. I also would like to refer to the European testing and experimental facilities. Not sure if I've stumbled upon that. They're basically established by the EU to, for example, there's the testing experimentation facilities for health, where basically they should help providers of AI technology for the healthcare sector to bring their solutions to the market faster by providing testing and validation services around the AI systems. So there are certain frameworks and construction the European Union is providing to basically have a test ground where we can test things out and apply and see how we can validate those requirements. And something like that will be definitely required also for different areas.
Excellent. Okay, I was lying. One more question. Close your eyes mentally and think we are now in the year 2030, 6 years from now. What do you think we have achieved by then in terms of accountability?
Well, hopefully we have some clearer guidelines than now, and people know what to do and how to interact with AI systems.
I do hope as well. Maybe there were already a couple of lawsuits which tried to figure out who was responsible for what in AI incidents.
Totally agree.
We will have more practical experience with the situation. I think it's not unavoidable.
Yes, lawsuits and fines. No question about that. And that will then establish expectations that are going a little bit beyond what the rules say. But that's okay. So that said, in the interest of time, Kirsten, Tomislav, thank you very, very much for your time. And a big thank you to our audience. I hope you enjoyed it and looking forward to the next time on this channel. Thank you and bye-bye.